Good day, dear students. In this video lesson, we will talk about the English literature in the 17th century. So let's start. So first of all, let's have a look at the historical background of the literature of the 17th century, which covers the period between the 1625 up to 1702. So during that period, there existed three religious groups in Britain. First of them is the Church of England, second one is the Roman Catholic Church, and the third one is the Puritans. So Church of England was represented by Anglican Protestants. So it was the official state established by King Henry VIII during the Reformation. So it was a hierarchical structure governed by archbishops and bishops. Church of England was a living symbol of England's independence from Rome. The second religious group is the Roman Catholic Church. It was represented by Catholics. It was a sizable minority which didn't accept the Reformation and remained Catholic. And the third religious group is Puritans, which was represented by Presbyterians and Dissenters. Puritans were nonconformists. They started to form during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Puritans believed that the Reformation hadn't been radical enough. They elected their ministers and criticized it as undemocratic, the hierarchical structure of other churches. Puritans had very strict moral principles. One of their principles was that the way to salvation lay in a life of hard work and avoidance of all forms of entertainment. So that was a religious background. That was the religious background of England at that period. Now let's turn at the political system of that period. So during that time, the Tudor monarchs reigned the country, and Charles I reigned from 1625 up to 1649. In 1629, he dissolved the parliament and ruled without it for 11 years. But in 1640, he had to reopen the parliament to ask for taxes. But the parliament refused to do that. In 1642, the parliament demanded the control of the army. This time, Charles refused, and as the result of that, civil war began. So the civil war took place between the Puritan army, which was under the command of Oliver Cromwell, and the King's Royalist forces. And the civil war ended in the Puritan victory. Charles was executed on June the 8th in 1649. Cromwell and his followers founded a republic which was named the Commonwealth Republic, but it collapsed in 1660 after the death of Cromwell. And as a result, monarchy was restored by King Charles II, and this period is called the Restoration period. So now let's talk about the literature of that period. So that period, which was the period after the Renaissance, poetry divided into two trends, the Cavalier poets and metaphysical poets. The Cavalier poets defended the monarchy against the Puritans during the reign of Charles I. And representatives of the Cavalier poetry are Robert Herrick, Thomas Carlyle, Robert Lovelace, Sir John Suckling, and others. So what were the main topics and themes of the Cavalier poetry? For example, an ideal gentleman, a lover, a soldier, a wit, a musician, a poet was the main hero of the Cavalier poetry. It was light-hearted approach to life was described in this poetry. Poetry for births, marriages, and great parties. Poems embodied the spirit of the upper classes before the Puritan Commonwealth. So here is an example of the Cavalier poetry. Here is an example of the Cavalier poetry written by Robert Herrick and which is named To Electra. I dare not ask a kiss, I dare not beg a smile, lest having that or this, I might grow proud the while. None of the utmost share of my desire shall be, only to kiss the air that lately kissed thee. Did you like the poem? So next form of the poetry, as I have previously mentioned, is a metaphysical poetry. So representatives of the metaphysical poetry were George Herbert, Richard Gresham, and Henry Vaughan. So these poets followed in the tradition of John Donne. We will speak about him sooner. So this poetry didn't deal with philosophical speculation, but with the themes of religion and love. 18th and 19th century, the metaphysical poets were not popular, and beginning of the 20th century, Eliot helped generate new appreciation for Donne and his followers. So now let's talk about the features of metaphysical poetry. One of the features of the metaphysical poetry is the use of conceits. So it is a comparison between objects which at first glance seem to have nothing in common. Next feature is argumentative quality of love poems, in which the poet tries to persuade his lover to share his point of view. The dramatic quality of the language, which often seems to be one side of a dialogue between the poet and his lover, or God or himself. The wide range of subjects from which the poet draws his imaginary, sciences, travel, medicine, alchemy, philosophy, and Elizabethan poetry, which used the stock imagery of the period, birds, flowers, sun, moon, stars, and etc. And the last feature of least feature of the metaphysical poetry is the use of wit. In the 17th century, the word wit meant the ability to relate dissimilar ideas, implied intellectual genius, the use of paradoxes, conceits, and puns. Well, now let's have a look at John Donne, a representative of let's say the founder of the metaphysical poetry. So he was born in 1572 and died in 1631. So he was born in London to a prominent Roman Catholic family. But he converted to Anglicanism during the 1590s. At the age of 11, he entered the University of Oxford, then Cambridge, but he took no degree. In 1592, he began to study law at Lincoln's Inn in London. In 1598, he was appointed private secretary to Sir Thomas Egerton, keeper of the Great Seal. So in 1601, he secretly married Egerton's niece, Anne More. He made a poor living as a lawyer. So Divine Poems was written in 1607 and it is considered his masterpiece. In 1615, he became a priest of the Anglican Church. He was appointed a royal chaplain. In 1621, he was named the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. He attained eminence as a preacher, delivered the most brilliant sermons of his time. So, here is the list of his works, among them poetry and essays. Well, you may pause the video and look through this list yourself, okay? And here is an example of his poem, and here is a Russian translation of it. You may look through it. And now let's talk about John Milton, another great representative of the 17th century literature. So he was born in 1608 and died in 1674. He was born in London into a middle-class family. He first prepared to enter the clergy, but after university he abandoned his plans to join the priesthood. He took the course of independent study to prepare for a career as a poet, so he studied classical and modern works of religion, science, philosophy, history, politics, and literature. He was proficient in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, Spanish, Italian, familiar with Old English and Dutch. So in May 1638 he began a 13-month tour of France and Italy, where he met many important intellectuals and influential people, and among them astronomer Galileo. So during the English Civil War, he championed the cause of the Puritans and Oliver Cromwell. He wrote a series of pamphlets advocating radical political topics, for example, the morality of divorce, the freedom of the press, etc. He served as a secretary for foreign languages in Cromwell's government, composing official statements defending the Commonwealth. But he steadily lost his eyesight and was completely blind by 1651. So after the restoration of Charles II to the throne in 1660, he was arrested as a defender of the Commonwealth. He was fined but soon released. So, unfortunately, the rest of his life he lived alone in the country. And he completed Paradise Lost in 1667. He completed Paradise Regained and the tragedy Samson Agonistes. He could oversee the printing of a second edition of Paradise Lost in 1674, which included an explanation of why the poem rhymes not, clarifying his use of blank verse. He died in November in England. So here is a selected bibliography of his works, among them Poetry, Lycidas, Poems, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes. So what is Paradise Lost? It can be called the most popular work, most famous work written by John Milton. It's a chronicle of Satan's temptation of Adam and Eve and their expulsion from Eden. It is a masterpiece and one of the greatest epic poems in the world literature. It is a debate regarding its theological themes, political commentary, and its depiction of the fallen angel Satan, who is often viewed as a protagonist of the work. In choosing between Latin and English for the language of the poem, Milton compromised by inventing a new dialect for poetry, one that is removed from the language of natural speech. How could this rebel Puritan not have a degree of sympathy for Satan? How could a scholar such as Milton believe that the tree of knowledge should be forbidden to mankind? And you may recite this poem, you may learn this poem by heart. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.